everyone. You are listening to the Rachael Maves Podcast, and I'm Rachael Maves, your host. Today, we are talking to Dr. Dennis Wiechmann. He has served as the superintendent of Sanger Unified School District since 2022, following leadership roles as assistant superintendent of human resources and more than 20 years as the district supervisor of child welfare and attendance. With a background as a school psychologist, he brings a strong focus on student well-being, equity, and achievement. In addition to district leadership, Dr. Wiechmann has taught statistics and research methods at Fresno State and conflict resolution in the doctoral program at CSU Channel Islands. During his leadership, Sanger Unified has emphasized professional learning communities, student growth models, and continuous improvement across schools. Known for his collaborative leadership and style and strategic vision, he is driven by the belief that schools can and should change lives by purpose, not by chance. Dennis, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm really excited just hearing a little bit about your background and coming up through, I would say, a unique path into the superintendency. Why did you choose a career in education? What brought you to this space?
You know, I always, even growing up, interesting, my mom was a teacher. And so I was exposed to the power of education as early as I can remember. And so going through, even through elementary and middle school, high school, just the idea of being and this will sound a little, I should say goofy. I'm like, it might sound a little goofy, but peer mediation and peer programs I actually was doing through middle school and high school. And that was something that I just gravitated towards, and the ability to work with students and help them. And I think being paired with seeing my mom as an educator, and you know the satisfaction that came from that, and it was stressful times too, but overall just the ability to, you know, as you read earlier, make a difference in another human being's life. I really kind of gravitated towards that, and then actually took a psychology class in high school, and at some point paired the two together. And that became the path, you know, going from high school into college with my school psychology degree, and then ultimately master's in that.
So I'd love to just hear a little bit more about the conflict resolution course that you're teaching at the doctoral program, because having that background in psychology, serving as a superintendent, I mean, that seems like just such a critical component in prepping new leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually what I'll reference is the 20 years that I did as child welfare and attendance. So that it was 20 years of conflict resolution. It is anytime a parent was coming in to meet with me, it was because there was something probably not good that was happening, and to be able to navigate that through from an interest-based approach. And always the interest was, you know, trying to get the student into a program or a place where they could be the most successful, given whatever circumstances those were around. So that really became my foundation for jumping in, and then teaching that it was a Channel Islands doctoral program at the time. I don't do that anymore because I have the superintendency really is a full-time job.
It's a little all-consuming.
Yeah. So that really lent itself well to going in, and then teaching that course through there, which really, when you look at it, interest-based bargaining was kind of the caveat and the foundation for that.
Yeah, for those of our listeners that aren't in the education space, or even maybe are in the education space but don't know about interest-based bargaining, I really appreciated going through that as the superintendent of how it turned negotiations from a zero-sum game into we actually have overlapping interests, and where are those places and how do we identify that and build towards that common goal versus kind of camping out on mistakes on both sides.
Yeah. And that can be a whole separate podcast on there, because the positional based, it can be the positional based bargaining that typically you have seen a lot of it with districts where they're at right now. And I know a lot of
Yeah.
superintendents really work from a collaborative position, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately you get into a spot where you have to say no.
Yeah.
And so, that's the difficulty sometimes navigating that through. We have a very good relationship with our union leaders, and we're small. We're 13,000 students, 13,200. So our ability to individually know all of the employees, I think, is super helpful. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that it isn't difficult, because when there are a limited amount of resources and you want to, compensation is always the perfect example, and you want to offer as much compensation as you can, especially when you know cost of living, that becomes difficult because
Yeah.
you potentially don't have the funds to do it, but you want to, and so you've got to, you have to navigate your way through that.
Yeah. So, from your lens as a current sitting superintendent and having been in this role now for a few years, what are the things that are keeping you up at night in the education sector?
I think, the biggest one right now, I guess, from the global perspective that keeps me up at night is just the way schools are funded. And I think you see a
Mm,
lot of that just across the state of California. You've seen a lot of the bigger districts go to strike, or almost get to strike. And so thinking about, okay, from a funding perspective, is the inflation just really goes exponentially through the roof. And we know our employees, both classified and certificated, they do amazing work coming through.
yeah.
And the ability to honor that, and it does come down at some point, how are you going to compensate to match the effort and dedication that people put into their jobs, and again, classified or certificated, but it isn't funded that way. So I think,
Hmm.
looking through, and also the enrollment in California, and just looking at the declining enrollments coming across,
Yeah.
that just puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the district. And for us in Sanger Unified, we have a changing demographic. So our
Mm,
unduplicated pupil count actually has dropped pretty significantly, which is, how we're navigating, the next step. How are we going to navigate the reduction in funds that are going to come over the next 3 years?
yeah.
Uh, so those are really the issues. I think from the global perspective, those are the main issues that at this point, not only Sanger Unified, but I think every district in California is having to grapple with a little bit.
So, as you think about that, because I heard you say two different things. One is just the funding model and
Mhm.
how it's currently structured. And I think the way in which it, I mean, really inhibits us from putting teachers and classified staff into a
Mhm.
different pay categories. That's one. And then the second one is declining enrollment that you guys are that I see California in general is seeing,
Yeah.
and across the country, actually, I would say, in some states. So as you think about that, what are the like two ways that you're thinking about moving forward for your own district or just in general?
So, obviously, with the funding model that we have in now, we're going through and we're looking at all of the service. So they're very specific to Sanger Unified, and I know the other districts are doing something similar, because it's
Mm-hmm.
a, even though there's a lot of superintendents, it really is a small group that are connected to that. So just working through and figuring out, okay, how do we be more efficient
Yeah.
with the services that we're offering, and how are we going to do those services if indeed it ends up impacting the number of employees that we have to provide those services. So that's the navigation that we're going through now. There also is a lot of push. I actually was able to testify in front of the Senate and Assembly Finance Committee, I think a month ago, and really talking about the enrollment-based funding versus ADA-based funding. And there's a lot of, you
Mm-hmm.
can talk to the legislatures, they understand, and it's like, yeah, no, we know we need to do enrollment-based funding, but I think the estimate that came through would be about $6 billion to adjust the Prop 98 to
Wow.
reflect an enrollment-based funding. And I always kind of laugh, because no business would run where you get funded only on a percentage of services that you deliver. So we've got 13,200 students, but yet we're not funded on 13,200 students. We're funded on, 94, 95% of those students, even though you
Yeah.
still have to provide the services and quality education and support services. So they know they need to fix it. I don't know what the time frame, potentially the new governor coming in will have a little bit of impact on that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of pressure on that, across the state. So,
well, and the theory behind that is, well, if the students aren't there, then that's why they tied it to that. So it'd create an incentive for getting, students that would show up to school. And then if they're not there, they're not really being educated. But I think you can make a pretty good argument. Like, how would you respond to that? I won't make the argument for you. How would you respond to that?
Yeah. Here's the beauty of being in child welfare and attendance for as long as I was. Before that really base funding and the way they changed it to 88, it was because the graduation rates were so low. And so they went through and they're, with the graduations like that, students were coming to school. So then on the backside, the legislature said, then we're not going to fund unless the kids come to school. And you have to put in service, supports, SARB, what have you, to increase your enrollment, which then by default would increase the graduation requirement.
Yeah.
So my answer to the other side of that, there's other ways to hold districts accountable with graduation rate. We have the dashboard now. I think it's an expectation. But to your point, to a legislature that or somebody that says, well, you shouldn't get the money because that student isn't there. But the teacher is still there, the counselor is still there, all of the staff that are working with the students, they're still there. And we need to staff for, the 13,000 students.
Yeah.
So the responsibility of educating a student doesn't go away because they might be absent or sick for a day. In fact, it actually makes it a little bit more difficult.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, to go through and, especially for our certificated staff, getting them the work to make up. And when you look at the rigor that we try to set, missing any school time is going to be difficult because everything scaffolds.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it ends up being double work on our staff. And the longer a student's absent, the more difficult it is. I could make a philosophical argument that you probably need more money based on your absences. So then you can put in additional supports and services to support them. So,
yeah, I 100% agree because I do think it's a misnomer and just kind of is like a gap in understanding that when a student, just because they're not at school doesn't mean that there's this work that comes up along the back end. And I think what you said is exactly right. Getting them caught up, making sure that they have everything that they need. Not just once they execute and turn something in, but did they really understand the information that they need to be able to move on to that next space? Like that's a lot of work anytime that a student misses. So I think that you're right with that piece. There's just a gap there. Yeah. So this is actually our last question, Dennis. You're just kind of flying through these. What question are we in education are we not asking that we really should be?
Boy, that's a big one. What questions are we? Oh gosh. I don't. Okay, that's interesting, and I'm trying to think what would be an example. Man, that's tough because we get so. And I'm just laughing thinking to myself, what question if I bring it down to Sanger Unified? So if I bring it down to more of a local setting, the questions going through for us, we're asking them, but basically when we go through and say, okay. Looking at student performance, that's ability to continue to increase that, the multi-tiered systems of support, our response to intervention. And I guess I look at that from, okay, now I'll go back and give you, okay, so this will prompt a question.
It takes a while to process this one, doesn't it?
It does. And I think one of the things that I am always the glass is half full. So, and we had already started talking about this in a cabinet before our LCAP came back, and it's going to, our unduplicated pupil count's going to go down. But one of the things I think we have to be careful out in education is as technology has advanced, and I'm a proponent of AI. I think it's wonderfully useful. It's the equivalent for people who come and say, well, you shouldn't use AI. To me, that's the equivalent of, well, you shouldn't have used the internet. Coming through. So it needs to be controlled within there. But what it started bringing up to us, because we're a one-on-one district, is actually going back and saying, okay, um, what really should be a percentage of time that students are using a device. For us, it's iPads from an instructional support standpoint
Yep.
versus that hands-on neurological,
Yes.
hands-on learning. Because the
Yes.
pendulum, when it went one-on-one, and COVID really, I think, added some fire to this because everybody had to go one-on-one. We
Yep.
had to develop those base systems, but now be able to come back and go, okay, is a, a kindergartner with an iPad, that they can take, that they have assigned to them versus potentially going back to a computer lab model, and saying, no, focusing, and our staff does a great job. I can walk through, we have a lot of project-based learning stuff that's happening, but I think
Yeah.
that forces the bigger question: what is a good balance
Yeah.
within there?
You brought up something I've actually been thinking a lot about these last couple of weeks, because there's been such a movement recently around getting technology out of the classroom. And as I was thinking about that, the question that came up for me is, in how are we utilizing technology in the classroom? If it is, and I would say, unfortunately, I think that there probably is a leaning this way of, we're putting kids in front of screens and then expecting them to engage or interact with whatever latest thing that it is, then I would say, yeah, that's probably a misuse of technology. But when we are utilizing technology purposefully, that are building actually skills that they're going to need when they get out to the workforce, then to me, that seems like the appropriate space. And I do get a little bit concerned that we are overcorrecting, like you just said, that and moving in that space of removing it completely versus almost doing like an internal audit of your system and organization to say, well, how are we using it in the first place? And what are the appropriate uses that we can really lean into and build capacity around versus just removing altogether?
Yeah, 100%. And for us, we are embarking on that path. And it will be collaborative with our teachers, with our school sites, just to answer the question, as you said, what from a practitioner standpoint, what's
Yeah.
a good balance? Because you cannot throw all of technology out. One, we use a lot of it because we've transitioned to a growth model, so we still have proficiency.
Yeah.
But when you start looking at a growth model down to the individual teachers, we have to have something to measure that's reliable and valid. And
Yeah.
so,
Same.
that's going to come through. And the state testing, by the way, is all online. So there's
Yeah.
some assessment knowledge that has to come with that. So
Yeah.
I do think it's a balance. And so we'll work on that. It's actually going to be a year process for us to go through and kind of work with our teachers and staff collaboratively to say, where is that balance going to come? Uh-oh, I might have frozen.
Oh, there you
There we
are,
go.
Dennis.
Nice.
Yep.
It dropped a little bit, so I'm not sure what part you got or what part I need to repeat.
I heard the part of you're gonna take the whole next year and work with your staff collaboratively to identify that and map out what that looks like.
Yeah, and come up with recommendations that then we can, we've got a base, just like you said, we've got that audit. We know where it's not going away, but how do you use it so it's a good balance?
Yeah. I love to once you go through that process, get you back on to find out what the outcome is and
Oh,
what are
absolutely.
the recommendation did the staff make and what shifts and changes are you going to put into place. I'm really curious.
Yeah, and I'd love to, because I think, again, there's other districts doing it too, but it's a good time because, the pendulum, and trying to keep the pendulum in the middle, that almost
Yeah.
becomes the art, because society is going to pivot so far the other way that it's like, nope, hold tight. There's still some benefits. We just need to make sure it's balanced, and it is developmentally and instructionally appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Dennis, and getting to hear a little bit about your story and your thinking, and appreciate the leadership that you have at Sanger Unified.
Oh, thank you. I always tell people I'm blessed to be here. It's a great system. I've been here for quite some time. So to be able to step in and then, it's gradual improvements at this point that we look at. It's a very high functioning system. So I'm excited. I always tell people I'm just blessed to be able to be part of that and part of that continued development.
Yeah. Well, they're lucky to have you. Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Dennis. Listeners, we know that spring brings with it a number of tasks that take up a lot of time and add a lot of stress to your plate. As a member of the educational community, I'd love to see you get some of your time back by making a few of those tasks a little bit easier. Check out Parsec's resource section on our website. It has multiple tools for helping you with your LCAP or strategic plan and your end-of-year climate and culture check-ins. Go to www.parseceducation.com/resources.